Good afternoon, Oorsee family. Today we're talking all about immigration to the US. I've got a special guest with me today, Karen-Lee Pollak from Pollak Immigration. She's the managing partner, and she's going to talk to us about some immigration questions we got from our Oorsee members. And I'm going to pass over to you, Karen, and please introduce yourself and tell us about your firm, how long you've been in the US, and what you mainly do to help people get visas.
Thank you, Walter, for having me. My name is Karen-Lee Pollak. I'm the managing attorney of Pollak Immigration. We are located in Dallas, Texas. We have clients all over the United States and all over the world. We help people come live and work in the United States, either temporarily or permanently. We also help investors, business owners, and families get reunited to live together in the United States. I have been here for over 25 years. I grew up in South Africa. I grew up in Johannesburg. I went to school in South Africa, and I got my law degree at Wits.
Okay, so what will you say is like the main categories that people come to the US? Not just from South Africa, but what's kind of the main immigration kind of visas or rights to come and work here?
You know, Walter, it goes across the gamut. It runs the gamut. There's family members coming, reuniting, being sponsored by other family members for green cards. We do a lot of temporary and permanent work visas to come work in the United States. For South Africans, we see a lot of intercompany transfer visas where somebody is opening up a branch of a South African company in the United States. We also do E2 investment visas. They're not available to South Africans, but South Africans with dual passports, where you invest $100,000 into a business. And then we also do, for high net worth individuals, the EB5 investment green card, where you invest a minimum of $800,000. But it runs the gamut from H-1B visas, which are temporary visas for professionals, H-2A visas for farm workers. We don't actually do them, but we work closely with a company that does. We do the green cards for farm workers who are here on H-2As, and then we do H-2Bs, which are temporary visas for non-agricultural positions. And I have been doing this in the United States for over 20 years. I chaired the Immigration America-bound practice for one of the largest law firms in the world. I then moved over to a regional business. And then after that, heading up the regional firm, I started my own immigration boutique in 2017.
Wow, so you have a wealth of experience helping not just South Africans, right? But people, like you said, from the UK. We have dual citizenship as well, from England and South Africa. So we would qualify, for instance, to come to the US under the E2 visa, right?
That is correct.
Can we just quickly talk about that visa? Can you explain to people? Because that'll be a lesser known visa, for instance, for South Africans, because it isn't open to everyone. But we know there's a lot of expats that watch Oorsee that will have dual citizenship or might consider coming to the US.
So the E2 visa is a non-immigrant visa. It is initially valid for 5 years and can be renewed indefinitely as long as the business that you are creating is operating. So you will have to invest $100,000 minimum into a business, and that could be either an existing business or you can start that business from scratch. Before you apply for the visa, we will have to show where you got the money from and how you spent the money. So the government is very worried about illegal activities. So we will have to show how you earned the money and then how you spent it. Now, I say $100,000 minimum. The regulations don't actually say a minimum number, but we see approval where somebody has invested $100,000 upwards. if you invest in this visa, your spouse can come with you, no matter if they have another passport or not. So if you marry to a South African citizen that has no other passport, they can still come with you and they will get work authorization. When you come in, your visa will be stamped for 2 years. So when that 2 years ends, you'd automatically leave and you'd come back, and that visa will automatically renew until you get to the 5-year mark. It's actually a pretty easy visa to get as long as you are have the dual citizenship and can invest that amount of money.
So tell me, we've heard some rumors of people who the E2 has a stipulation you have to be a profitable business, right? And during COVID, they might have had issues showing profitability if they had a bed and breakfast or a business like that. Is that still a rule, and has that affected people? Will they lose their E2 if they don't show profit every year?
No, there's no requirement that they show profit. I'm not sure where you're getting that from. They are more concerned with the business operating as opposed to being profitable. It is created to create jobs for Americans. So we do want to show that you employ 2 to 3 people at least, so that we can prove that the business wasn't just created to satisfy and sustain the immigrant family, but it's creating jobs as well. But there's no set requirement of jobs, and we see approval and renewals with no problem when there's 2 to 3 employees other than the investor.
Well, that's fantastic. It's because of these rumors that you hear on social media and people talking that we've come to you, because you get so much misinformation by people just sharing their advice. I think it's very important now to point out to people, you got to go talk to a lawyer, an immigration professional, somebody who specializes in this field, not just any lawyer. So you mentioned there's something about it's a non-immigrant visa. So how does that affect the family living here? And if they have kids, will they never become American citizens, or is there a pathway to citizenship? And then how are the kids affected when they might maybe reach like 18 or 21 or whatever the legal age is here in the US?
Okay, so the E2 is a non-immigrant visa. It will only be valid as long as the business is operating. The moment that the business fails or you sell it, you're going to lose that visa. So the business has to operate. Children can also stay until they turn 21, then they age out and they will have to qualify for their own visa in order to stay in the United States. It generally does not have a path to a permanent residency or citizenship because it's a temporary visa. The only way that it could change from being a non-immigrant visa to an immigrant visa or green card is if you invest an additional at least $700,000 into the business and convert it into what I mentioned, an EB-5 investment green card. But that is the only way that the E2 could lead to a green card.
And that EB-5 has recently been increased quite considerably, right? It used to be a lot less that you could invest.
The minimum before was an investment of $500,000, and now the minimum has gone up to $800,000.
And that's, with the rand devaluing the way it's done, that is a massive difference in South African rand. So I would imagine most people.
Think how many South Africans can still afford it. It's really crazy. There are still a substantial amount of South Africans investing in that EB-5.
Well, it's fantastic to know that people are still doing well in the South African economy. That's
right.
Great. So let's talk about the difference now about immigrant visas and non-immigrant visas, because we get a lot of, again, horror stories of people not knowing the difference, thinking they've made it to the US, and then they got to leave again and reapply, and then they're stuck in this kind of limbo for years with the transition. Can you talk me through the differences there, please?
Okay, so briefly, a non-immigrant visa is a temporary visa that allows you to come into the United States for a specific amount of time. So a lot of South Africans, for example, get visitors visas, which are called B1, B2 visas. In their passport, it says that the visa is valid for 10 years, but that doesn't mean they can come into the United States and live here for 10 years. They can only come in on the visitor's visa for 6 months, and they cannot work while they're here. There are certain business visas where you can come in on behalf of an overseas company temporarily to train people or to install equipment. But generally, the visitor's visa, you cannot work, and the maximum you can stay is 6 months. There are other kind of non-immigrant visas where you can work in the United States, such as an H-1B professional visa. That is for people with degrees coming in to work for a specific employer in a specific field related to their degree. That visa is valid for 3 years and can be renewed for 3 years. So the non-immigrant visa is generally a temporary visa. And depending on the type, some of those visas allow you to work and others do not. The immigrant visa is also known as a green card or permanent residency. That allows you to permanently live and work in the United States. And depending on how you got that green card, you can apply for citizenship. Let's say you got it based on marriage to a US citizen. You can apply for citizenship after 3 years of having that green card. Any other basis, if you got a green card through other family or through employment, you can apply for citizenship after 5 years.
Okay, so there are ways to change your status, but I've seen so many instances where people have come across issues, right? Paperwork not filled in or wasn't filled in correct, and then people end up with a mess, right? Can you talk to me about the consequences, for instance, of taking a chance? I again want to refer to somebody I spoke to this week who thought, if I'm going to overstay 15 days, it's not going to make a big issue. Can you talk to people about the impact, and how seriously the US take these laws, and if you transgress them, what the consequences could be?
Well, they could be really, really severe. So, for example, if you overstay a visa by more than 6 months, 180 days, you have incurred a 3-year bar to applying for any type of visa to come into the United States. If you overstay by more than 6 months, so 181 days onwards, you have incurred up to a year, you have incurred a 10-year bar to applying for any type of visa. So there are really severe consequences. In some very limited circumstances, there are hardship waivers to waive that time that you were here unlawfully. If you were applying for a green card, the waiver itself is going to take 3 years to obtain. They are very backlogged, and it's a very hard waiver to obtain. You can only get it if you can show hardship to a US citizen or lawful permanent resident spouse, child, or parent, and the child must be over 21. So that's a very tough visa to get. It's certainly going to add a lot of costs onto what you're already paying for a green card, and the wait for that visa for the hardship waiver to be adjudicated is at least 3 years. In regard to the non-immigrant field, it's also tough to ever get a visitor's visa again if you've overstayed any time. Even if it's not 6 months, a consular officer can look unfavorably on your application, and highly unlikely you would get a visitor's visa.
Yeah, so we want to stress that do not take chances with US immigration. You could have the best excuse in your mind, but if there's any chance that you can overstay a visa or overstep a line, please don't do it, right? So,
right, and if you know that there are consequences, like you're ill or a family member is ill, apply for an extension of stay with immigration, and that will help you in your immigration journey. Without applying for an extension, it's going to be very tough to get a visa in the future if you overstay.
Okay, so, that's really great advice. Ask for an extension. I wanted to talk to you about for instance, now the spouse or the partner of the person with the visa, because that was the situation we were in. My wife came over with an L1, and eventually that became a permanent residence. We all have green cards. But initially when I came over, it was quite a shock to find out that I couldn't work. I knew I had to apply for an EAD, like a employment authorization document or whatever, this card. It looks like a green card almost that I had. But that took my first application took over 9 months to arrive. And during that time, I wasn't allowed to work. I never knew it was going to take that long. And again, there was this, I wanted to take this chance and think, I'll just go out and get some job. A lot of families, need 2 incomes. I wanted to go work, but I didn't want to take that chance, right? So can you just explain to people what the EAD is, and again, not to break the rules on that, please?
Sure. So let me back up a little bit. If you are the spouse of a visa holder, you can always come in with that spouse to the United States. If it's a visitor's visa, you've got to apply on your own. But if you have a spouse who is coming to study or work in the United States, you can come with them and you can apply for a spousal visa. Not all non-immigrant visas allow the spouse to work. So, for example, if you're coming in as an H-1B holder, which is a professional visa, and your spouse comes with you, the spouse will get what's called an H-4 visa, but they are not allowed to work and will never be allowed to work or apply.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's very important for a lot of people to know, that the spouse won't be allowed to work.
They cannot work on an H-4 until the spouse who's being sponsored has an approved I-140, which is the first stage of the green card. And that's going to take, in the best case scenario, given current processing times, about 18 months. So if you're just coming in on an H-1B and you bring your spouse and there's no employer sponsoring you for a green card, your spouse cannot work. If the employer also sponsors you for a green card, your spouse will be able to work when you get an approved I-140, which is 18 months approximately after you start the green card process. So that's important to know. In regard to the L1, which you were talking about, Walter, the law has recently changed. Previously, as you said, once the spouse came to the United States, they had to file an employment authorization application, which can take 6 to 9 months. And in that time, they cannot legally work. Now, with the L1, the law has recently changed, and the spouse will get automatic work authorization when they come through customs on their L2 visa. It's the same.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
Yes, it's great. It's great. So
it was never spend so much time at home and realized I don't like sitting at home. But I mean, right. I didn't want to break the rules, because you can get kicked out of the country, right? So
sure.
So the next question then is about, you mentioned these time frames, and it seems like they just keep stretching out further and further. Is there still a massive backlog? I'm so tired of everybody using COVID as an excuse for everything from parts to cupcakes, right?
Right.
So have we seen that these time frames have been pushed out? Or
yes, the time frames are horrible. There's still a huge backlog. For the first time in a long time, it's always been like this for China and India, but there are more applications than visas available. So you cannot file the last stage of the green card for people from the rest of the world. China and India have been 8-year waits for ages. South Africa and the rest of the world now is at least a year wait before you can file the final stage of the green card.
So just one question, going back a step. We were talking about people not being allowed to work, right? But can they run a business, right? Or can they start a business? Or if you officially start a business, like register an LLC, is that also seen now you're working?
You can register the LLC. I get this question a lot. You can register the LLC, but you cannot work for it, even if you don't get a salary.
You can't get a salary off it, but if you're selling cookies online to your South African friends, even that, you're earning an income in America, right?
Right. You should not be paid in the United States.
Okay.
Working. I am dealing with a case right now where people came in on a visitor's visa and they said that they were going to help their sibling who lived in the United States look after their child, so their nephew who had some special needs. They cancelled her visa at the airport, said that was working without work authorization, even though she was not going to be paid to look after her nephew, and they barred her from coming back to the United States for 5 years because they considered that to be work.
So, they really take this seriously. You can't take any of your kind of assumptions for granted. You can't listen to people online who are not qualified immigration lawyers. That's the main takeaway I think people should get from this, is they really need to talk to a specialist. So is there anything that you would add now that we kind of missed before we get onto your specific, like how people get a hold of you? Like, is there something that you see mistakes South African or immigrants make that we can rectify? And at what stage would you want to get involved with their application?
Unfortunately, I see mistakes all the time, either by people who represent themselves or by mistakes even made by other lawyers. People think that it's very easy. They think, I just need to fill in a form. It's not only the form, but it's the supporting documents that you provide and what you say in your application, which can have long-term consequences. We briefly discussed some of those consequences. But for example, this client of mine, if she was prepared by a lawyer, she would not have said that when she entered. And now her visitor's visa is being cancelled for 5 years. She also had a green card that is in process, and she will not be able to come here. So now she has increased the costs. So you think you're saving money, but it's going to cost her probably 3 times what she would have normally paid. So, as they say, cheap is expensive.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And getting advice on the internet about anything is risky, but when it comes to your life and immigration visas, especially to the US, there is very little leeway or forgiveness there. Our application, for instance, changing status from the L1 onto my wife then applying for a highly skilled permit, that application was well north of 400 pages.
Right.
We'd lived in several countries. You have to get a police clearance from England, from the Netherlands, from Dubai. You have to list every place you've ever lived since you were 16. That took a bit of digging.
Yeah.
Every house you've lived in, like wherever you travel to, every country you've ever visited or visa you ever had. You can't just hand in, for instance, your degree. We had to go get every single subject that you did in university listed, transcribed into English. It was months and months of paperwork stacked up to the roof. So people should not think the 5-page application form is going to be filled in and you're halfway there. It took months of preparation with a immigration lawyer to go through this. So can you just walk me now through the process, right?
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? Yes. Just for those people thinking of immigrating from South Africa, or if you are an expat, there's a couple of documents you need to get, and it can take some time to get. So if you're thinking about going on this journey, start gathering these documents now. And those are unabridged birth certificates, unabridged marriage certificates, certified copies of divorce decrees, military records. If you have joint custody over children, get a letter drafted by an advocate in South Africa, an affidavit. by your ex-spouse authorizing you to take your children outside the United States and apply for immigration benefits for your children. Those kind of things can take ages. I have one client, they filed a marriage-based case on their own. They provided a short form birth certificate. They got a request for evidence, which they had to respond to within 60 or 90 days. They didn't have the unabridged birth certificate within the 90 days, so the case was denied. So now they've spent all this money and they didn't have the documents up front to be able to satisfy such requests. So I can't remember if they used a lawyer or they did it themselves, but at a minimum they lost, besides the time, they lost at least $2,000 worth of filing fees paid to the government.
Wow, that's incredible. And this week, one of our friends were denied their green card application because of a missing document, and then they only had those month or 2 months to reply. They missed the deadline, and the whole green card application was denied. And now that's going to set them back 4 years. You know, it has massive consequences. So I'm glad that you mentioned it. So let's talk about the journey. Somebody wants to immigrate, right? They're sitting in South Africa, they're thinking about it. They maybe have, you know, a way or an idea of what visa they might be able to get from personal research. At what point would you want them to contact you to make sure that you can guide them through the whole process properly?
Well, in theory, right away, as soon as they know they have a way to come in, they can contact us and we can help them from the beginning. Just briefly, the most common ways you can come in are a family member sponsors you. That family member must be a parent, child over 21, or sibling can sponsor you, or spouse. So if you have one of those, contact us and we can help you with that process. The next way you can come in is if you have an employer to sponsor you for a temporary or permanent green card. So we can assist the moment you've got a job offer and an employer willing to sponsor you. We also help aliens of extraordinary ability who've won awards, who are professional athletes, who are scientists. They don't need an employer, and we help them with that. So they should come to us. We can evaluate their resume and see if we believe they qualify for one of these tough visas. You can enter the DV lottery where you can win a green card. You don't need a lawyer for that. And that is in October. And then there's the EB5 investment visa if you have $800,000 to invest to get a green card, or the E2 non-immigrant visa if you've got a passport other than just the South African passport, where you would invest at least $100,000.
So is there a reliable place that people can go and research this? Because I don't want to just tell people go Google it, because that's how a lot of these unfortunate situations start. Do you have like a page on your website, or does the US Immigration have, like, so they can go and see whether they can qualify for a way before they contact you?
Well, there's no actual form anywhere which will assess whether you qualify, but you can go to our website at pollakimmigration.com. That's www.pollak, Pollak immigration.com. And we have videos and blogs on every possible visa out there. So you can look at those and see if you feel you can qualify. You can also email us and we can schedule a consultation.
That's fantastic. So that brings me to kind of my last question for you is, how do people get hold of you? I mean, we'll post in the link something to your website, but I mean, what's your preferred way to contact? Do you do like a Zoom call with people in South Africa, or do you prefer to be emailed? What's the best way? How do they get hold of you?
Well, initially you can contact us at info@pollakimmigration.com. You can tell us a little bit about you and what your issue is. On our website, we actually have a form you could fill out to see if you qualify, basically, but it's always better to talk to somebody first, because you may think you qualify and you don't, or we may know alternative ways that you haven't even thought about yet. So it's always good to email us at info@pollakimmigration.com. And then we can set up a call. That can be phone call, that can be by Zoom, that can be by Skype, WhatsApp, Teams, basically in person. If you are in the United States, we're happy to chat to you and help you in your immigration journey.
I mean, that's fantastic. But actually, there's one more thing I wanted to ask you. For instance, if you do come to the US, right, that you mentioned, on a tourist visa, and then they go and speak to you about potentially immigrating to the US, is that a violation? Because now you're not trying to change status, you're just, as a tourist, curious, right?
No, you can go see a lawyer, you can even buy a business, you just can't work for it or get paid by it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had a business in the US for like 10 years before we moved here. I could just never draw a salary here or have a W-2. So thank you so much for going through all of this with us. It's complicated. It's really, but it's really life-changing and very important stuff. So I just reiterate, go and see a lawyer and go and talk to Karen-Lee Pollak. She can help you.
We're happy to help, and thank you, Walter, for having me on your show.